There is a particular kind of exhaustion that settles into the bones of those who spend their lives performing for an audience that never quite applauds loud enough. You know this weariness intimately. It lives in the space between who you are and who you think you should be, in the gap between your authentic voice and the words you believe others want to hear. We begin this journey together in recognition of a universal human predicament: the relentless pursuit of approval that has somehow become the organizing principle of modern existence. You wake each morning not with the question, "What do I truly want today?" but rather, "What will others think of what I do today?" The difference between these two questions is the difference between freedom and captivity, between authentic living and elaborate performance. Michel de Montaigne, writing in his Tower Study in 16th century France, understood something that our hyper-connected age has only made more urgent: that the opinions of others, however well-intentioned, however loudly voiced, however persistently they knock at the door of your consciousness, are ultimately none of your business. This is not callousness, it is liberation. Consider for a moment the architecture of your own anxiety. How much of your mental real estate is occupied by the imagined thoughts of people who may barely think of you at all? How many decisions have you postponed, dreams have you edited, truths have you swallowed? All in service of maintaining an image that exists primarily in your own mind. The most profound prison, Montaigne knew, is the one we build for ourselves, out of other people's potential disappointments. The ancient Stoics spoke of the dichotomy of control, the fundamental distinction between what is up to us and what is not. The opinions of others fall squarely into the latter category. Yet we exhaust ourselves trying to control the uncontrollable, like attempting to direct the wind by shouting at it. Montaigne, though not strictly a Stoic, grasped this wisdom intuitively. His essays are filled with the recognition that we suffer not from the weight of reality, but from the weight of our own expectations about how reality should conform to our desires. "I am myself the matter of my book," Montaigne wrote, and in doing so he performed perhaps history's first great act of radical self-acceptance. He did not write to impress the scholars of the Sorbonne or to curry favor with the nobility. He wrote because he was endlessly fascinated by the contradictions, curiosities, and quiet revelations of his own experience. In this simple act, choosing his own consciousness as worthy of examination, he modeled a way of being that was revolutionary then and remains so now. The modern world has amplified this ancient struggle exponentially. We live in an age of perpetual visibility, where every thought can be broadcast, every moment documented, every choice subjected to the immediate judgment of strangers. Social media has created a funhouse mirror version of community, where connection is measured in metrics and worth is calculated by algorithms designed to keep us scrolling, comparing, performing. Yet beneath this digital cacophony, the same fundamental questions that troubled our ancestors continue to whisper: who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly value? What would I do if I knew no one would judge me for it? These questions are not academic, they are practical, urgent, life-altering inquiries that demand not just intellectual understanding but embodied response. The path Montaigne carved through these questions was neither the path of the hermit nor the path of the rebel. He did not advocate for complete withdrawal from society, nor did he suggest we should deliberately antagonize others just to prove our independence. Instead, he pointed towards something more subtle and more powerful: the cultivation of an inner compass so reliable, so aligned with our deepest values, that the magnetic pull of others' expectations begins to lose its hold. This is not the philosophy of not caring about anything that would be nihilism, a different beast entirely. This is the philosophy of caring so deeply about what truly matters that everything else falls away naturally, like autumn leaves that have served their purpose and now release their grip on the branch. When you know what you stand for, what you love, what brings meaning to your brief time on this earth, the opinions of others become interesting data points rather than governing principles. The transformation that occurs when you stop caring about the wrong things is not gradual, it is often sudden, like the moment a fever breaks or a fog lifts. You realize that most of the rules you've been following were never rules at all, just habits of thought passed down through generations of people who were also trying to figure out how to live. You see that the approval you've been seeking was always available from the one person whose opinion actually determines the quality of your daily experience, yourself. But this recognition comes with its own challenges. To live authentically in a world that rewards conformity requires courage, not the kind of courage that charges into battle, but the quieter courage that chooses truth over comfort, that speaks honestly, even when honesty is inconvenient, that pursues what matters even when what matters is unpopular. As we embark on this exploration together, we carry with us the understanding that philosophy is not an academic exercise but a practical art. Montaigne's insights about the liberation that comes from not caring what others think are not meant to be admired from a distance but lived, tested, embodied in the choices we make each day. The question is not whether his philosophy is intellectually compelling, though it is, but whether it works, whether it leads to greater freedom, deeper peace, more authentic relationships, and a life that feels genuinely our own. The journey ahead will take us through the labyrinth of social expectations, past the mirrors that reflect others' definitions of success, beyond the noise of cultural programming, toward a place of radical self-acceptance. It is a journey that requires us to question everything we think we know about what it means to live well, to succeed, to matter in this world. Are you ready to discover what happens when you stop caring about the opinions that have held you captive? Are you prepared to explore what emerges when you release your grip on the need for external validation? The path forward is not always comfortable, but it leads to something precious: the experience of being fully, unapologetically yourself. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world sleeps and the mind runs free, we often find ourselves wrestling with the same phantom that has haunted human consciousness since we first developed the capacity for abstract thought: the belief that we can control outcomes through the sheer force of our worry. You know this wrestling match intimately, the way anxiety masquerades as productivity, the way obsessive planning pretends to be wisdom, the way we mistake the illusion of control for actual power. Montaigne, observing the tumultuous political landscape of 16th century France, where religious wars tore communities apart and certainty was a luxury no one could afford, came to understand something that our modern world, with its technological promises of prediction and management, has somehow forgotten: that the attempt to control what cannot be controlled is the source of most human suffering. The ancient Chinese sage Lao Tzu wrote, "The sage is guided by what he feels and not by what he sees." This wisdom points to a fundamental truth that Montaigne embraced in his own way: that there is a profound difference between responding to what is actually happening and reacting to what we imagine might happen. Most of our mental energy is consumed not by present reality but by elaborate scenarios we construct about possible futures, most of which never come to pass. Consider the architecture of human worry. We worry about what others might think about something we haven't even done yet. We worry about how we'll handle challenges that may never arise. We worry about whether we're worrying about the right things. This recursive loop of anxiety is not wisdom, it is a form of mental imprisonment that keeps us perpetually focused on phantoms while life, actual life, unfolds around us unnoticed. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, himself no stranger to circumstances beyond his control, he was born a slave, taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about events. Montaigne, though he arrived at his insights through personal reflection rather than formal philosophical training, understood this principle viscerally. He observed that two people could experience identical circumstances and have entirely different qualities of life, based solely on their internal response to those circumstances. But here we must be careful not to fall into the trap of spiritual materialism, the belief that if we just think the right thoughts, everything will go our way. Montaigne was too honest an observer of life to embrace such magical thinking. He knew that terrible things happen to good people, that disease and death and loss are woven into the fabric of existence, that no amount of positive thinking can eliminate the fundamental vulnerability of human life. The liberation he offered was not liberation from difficulty, but liberation within difficulty. It was the recognition that while we cannot control what happens to us, we have profound influence over what happens within us. This shift in focus from trying to control external circumstances to developing internal resilience is where true power lies. Think about the last time you found yourself caught in the grip of trying to control someone else's behavior. Perhaps it was a romantic partner whose affections seemed to be cooling, a child whose choices filled you with worry, a friend whose opinion of you seemed to be shifting. Notice how the very act of trying to control their response created tension, anxiety, and often the exact outcome you were trying to prevent. This is what Montaigne observed about human nature, that our attempts to force life into our preferred configurations often create the very chaos we're trying to avoid. The parent who micromanages their child's choices often raises a child who rebels against all authority. The romantic partner who desperately seeks constant reassurance often pushes their partner away through their very neediness. The friend who manipulates social situations to be liked often finds themselves surrounded by people who don't really know them at all. The alternative Montaigne proposed is not passivity, but a different kind of engagement with life, one based on acceptance rather than resistance, on curiosity rather than control, on trust rather than fear. This shift requires what we might call philosophical courage, the willingness to live with uncertainty, to act without guarantees, to love without assurance of being loved in return. Modern neuroscience has validated what Montaigne intuited centuries ago, that our brains are prediction machines, constantly trying to anticipate what will happen next, so we can prepare appropriate responses. This capacity served our ancestors well when the primary threats were physical and immediate. A rustling in the bushes might signal a predator, and quick action could mean the difference between life and death. But in our current environment, where most threats are psychological and social rather than physical, this same predictive mechanism often works against us. We treat a potential social embarrassment with the same urgency our ancestors reserved for saber-toothed tigers. We respond to uncertainty about the future, as if it were an immediate physical danger. Our nervous systems, calibrated for a world that no longer exists, keep us in a state of chronic vigilance that exhausts us without actually making us safer. Montaigne's approach to this predicament was elegantly simple. Instead of fighting against uncertainty, he embraced it as the fundamental condition of human existence. Que sais? Que sais? He asked, "What do I know?" This was not skepticism for its own sake, but a form of intellectual humility that opened space for wonder, for learning, for the possibility that life might surprise him in ways he couldn't anticipate. This attitude of not knowing, what Zen Buddhism calls beginner's mind, creates a paradoxical form of confidence. When you stop pretending to know more than you actually know, when you release the exhausting effort of trying to predict and control every outcome, you discover a different kind of strength. The resilience that comes from trusting your ability to respond creatively to whatever arises. The businessman who stops trying to control market forces and instead focuses on building genuine value finds that opportunities appear he never could have planned. The artist who releases attachment to critical acclaim and focuses on authentic expression often discovers that their most personal work resonates most universally. The person who stops trying to manage others' opinions and simply lives their values finds that they attract people who appreciate them for who they actually are. This is not mystical thinking, but practical wisdom. When we stop wasting energy on futile attempts to control the uncontrollable, we free up enormous reserves of attention and creativity for what is actually within our influence. We discover that our sphere of genuine control is both smaller and more significant than we imagined smaller, because it includes primarily our own thoughts, choices, and responses, but more significant because these internal elements are precisely what determine the quality of our experience. The path forward is not about becoming passive or resigned, but about learning to discern the difference between appropriate action and compulsive reaction, between genuine influence and the illusion of control. It requires developing what we might call philosophical maturity, the ability to act decisively when action is called for, and to rest peacefully when effort would be wasted. As we continue this journey together, we carry with us Montaigne's gentle but revolutionary insight that the life spent trying to control what cannot be controlled is a life spent fighting shadows, while the life that embraces uncertainty with curiosity and grace discovers freedoms that the controller never imagined possible. There exists a particular kind of torment reserved for those who have made perfection their master. The endless, exhausting effort to eliminate every flaw, to anticipate every criticism, to polish every rough edge until nothing authentic remains. You have felt the weight of this burden, the way perfectionism masquerades as excellence while actually being its greatest enemy. The way the pursuit of flawlessness leads not to beauty but to paralysis. Montaigne, writing with the measured cadence of someone who has made peace with his own contradictions, offers us a different vision. I am not teaching, I am telling. In this simple statement lies a profound liberation from the perfectionist's trap. He did not write his essays to prove his brilliance or to present himself as a finished product worthy of admiration. Instead, he offered his thoughts as they were partial, evolving, sometimes contradictory, and in doing so, he gave us permission to be human. The ancient Greek concept of arete, often translated as virtue or excellence, is frequently misunderstood in our modern context. We think of excellence as the absence of mistakes, the achievement of some impossible standard of flawlessness. But the Greeks understood arete as something quite different, the full expression of one's essential nature, the actualization of potential in all its messy, imperfect, gloriously human complexity. A tree does not achieve arete by becoming perfectly straight and uniform, but by growing fully into its own unique form, responding to the conditions of soil and weather and light in ways that honor both its essential nature and its particular circumstances. The gnarled oak that has weathered storms for centuries, with its twisted branches and weathered bark, expresses arete more completely than the artificially pruned topiary in a formal garden. This understanding radically shifts our relationship to imperfection. What we have been taught to see as flaws, our hesitations, our contradictions, our unfinished thoughts, become evidence of our aliveness, proof that we are still growing, still learning, still capable of surprise. Montaigne embraced what he called his natural form, not as an excuse for laziness or mediocrity, but as a recognition that authenticity is more valuable than artificial polish. The perfectionist's dilemma is that perfection, by definition, cannot be improved upon. It is static, complete, dead. Life, by contrast, is dynamic, evolving, perpetually incomplete. To demand perfection from life is like demanding that a river stop flowing or that a flower stop blooming. It is to misunderstand the very nature of what we are trying to perfect. Consider how perfectionism operates in your own life. Notice how it prevents you from starting projects that matter to you because you cannot guarantee the outcome will meet your impossible standards. Observe how it keeps you from sharing your ideas because they are not yet fully formed, your art because it is not yet masterful, your love because it is not yet unconditional. Perfectionism is not high standards, it is a sophisticated form of procrastination, a way of avoiding the vulnerability that comes with genuine effort. The Japanese aesthetic principle of wabi-sabi offers a beautiful alternative to our Western obsession with flawlessness. Wabi-sabi finds beauty in impermanence, imperfection, and incompleteness. The tea bowl with an irregular glaze, the garden where moss grows between carefully placed stones, the building that shows the gentle wear of weather and time, these are not seen as failures to achieve perfection, but as expressions of the natural order, which includes entropy, change, and the passage of time as essential elements of beauty. Montaigne understood this intuitively. His essays meander like conversations with a thoughtful friend, circling around ideas rather than marching toward conclusions, allowing for contradiction and uncertainty, embracing digression as a form of authenticity rather than a failure of organization. He wrote, "I do not paint the being, I paint the passage," acknowledging that he was capturing not fixed truths but moments in an ongoing process of becoming. This approach liberates us from what we might call the tyranny of the final draft. How much creative energy is lost to the belief that we must have our thoughts perfectly organized before we can share them? How many contributions to human knowledge and beauty remain locked inside minds that are waiting for the impossible moment when everything is perfectly clear and completely worked out? The myth of perfectionism is that it leads to better outcomes. The reality is often quite different. Perfectionism tends to produce work that is polished but lifeless, technically proficient but lacking in genuine insight or emotional resonance. The perfectionist spends so much energy eliminating what might be criticized that they often eliminate what might be celebrated as well. Moreover, perfectionism is fundamentally based on a misunderstanding of how excellence actually develops. Mastery comes not from avoiding mistakes, but from making them generously and learning from them rapidly. The jazz musician who never plays a wrong note is not demonstrating skill, they are demonstrating fear. The master improviser knows that wrong notes are not failures but opportunities, raw material that can be woven into something unexpectedly beautiful. Montaigne's approach to his own imperfections was not to deny them, but to study them with the same curiosity he brought to everything else. He wrote about his vanity, his inconsistencies, his physical ailments, his intellectual limitations, not as confessions seeking forgiveness, but as honest observations worth examining. In doing so, he transformed his flaws from sources of shame into sources of insight. This shift from perfection to authenticity has profound implications for how we relate to others. When we stop trying to present ourselves as flawless, we create space for genuine connection. People are not drawn to perfection, they are intimidated by it, alienated by it, bored by it. They are drawn to authenticity, to the courage of vulnerability, to the recognition of shared humanity that comes when someone is willing to say, "I don't have it all figured out," and that's okay. The perfectionist lives in constant fear of criticism because they have made the mistake of believing that criticism is always accurate and always matters. Montaigne offers a different perspective. Criticism is simply another person's opinion, filtered through their own experience, biases, and limitations. Some criticism is useful and should be considered thoughtfully. Much of it is not, and should be acknowledged politely and then released. This does not mean becoming indifferent to feedback or abandoning all standards. It means developing the discernment to distinguish between criticism that serves our growth and criticism that serves someone else's need to diminish us. It means learning to separate our worth as human beings from the quality of our performance in any particular moment. The path beyond perfectionism begins with what we might call radical self-acceptance. Not the lazy kind that uses acceptance as an excuse to avoid effort, but the courageous kind that accepts our current limitations while remaining committed to growth. It is the recognition that we are both finished and unfinished, both complete and evolving, both perfectly imperfect in this moment and capable of change. As we move deeper into this exploration, we carry with us Montaigne's gentle invitation to embrace our natural form, to find beauty in our becoming rather than demanding completion, to offer our imperfect contributions to the world, not in spite of their imperfection, but because their imperfection is what makes them genuinely ours. In the quiet chambers of his tower library, surrounded by 1,000 books whose certainties contradicted one another, Michel de Montaigne made a discovery that would liberate him from the exhausting pursuit of absolute knowledge, that uncertainty, rather than being the enemy of wisdom, might actually be its most intimate companion. Que sais, what do I know? He inscribed as his motto. Not as an admission of defeat, but as a declaration of freedom. You have felt the weight of pretending to know more than you actually know. In conversations where you nod knowingly about subjects you barely understand, in moments where you defend opinions you adopted without deep reflection, in the countless times you have felt compelled to have an answer when "I don't know" would have been more honest and ultimately more helpful. This compulsion to appear knowledgeable is not wisdom, it is a form of performance that keeps us trapped in the very shallowness we are trying to escape. Montaigne understood something that our information-saturated age has made even more crucial, that the accumulation of facts is not the same as the development of understanding. He lived through an era when the printing press was democratizing access to knowledge, when new discoveries were challenging old certainties, when the very foundations of truth seemed to be shifting beneath people's feet. Sound familiar? Rather than responding to this uncertainty with anxiety or dogmatism, Montaigne embraced it as an opportunity. He realized that the beliefs he held most firmly were often simply the accidents of his birth, the culture he happened to be born into, the family that shaped his early years, the historical moment that formed his assumptions about how the world works. This recognition did not lead him to relativism, but to something more nuanced. A deep appreciation for the complexity of truth and the humility appropriate to finite human understanding. The ancient Chinese sage Zhuangzi told a story about a man who dreamed he was a butterfly, only to wake up and wonder whether he was actually a butterfly, dreaming he was a man. This story captures something essential about the human condition. We live inside our own perspective so completely that we often forget we are looking through a particular lens rather than seeing reality directly. Montaigne grasped this truth viscerally, and it transformed how he related to his own thoughts and beliefs. When you hold your opinions lightly, not carelessly, but gently, something remarkable happens. You become more curious and less defensive. You listen to understand, rather than to refute. You ask questions not to trap others in contradictions, but to genuinely explore together what might be true. This shift from knowing to wondering is not a sign of weakness but of maturity. Not intellectual poverty, but intellectual sophistication. Consider how much energy you spend defending positions you are not even certain you believe. How many arguments have you won that left you feeling empty rather than victorious? How often have you discovered that the person you were disagreeing with was actually pointing towards something you had not considered? Montaigne's approach offers an alternative, the radical honesty of intellectual humility. This does not mean abandoning all convictions or sliding into paralyzing relativism. Montaigne had strong values. He believed in friendship, in tolerance, in the importance of self-examination. But he held these values as working hypotheses rather than final truths, as north stars for navigation rather than iron chains that prevented movement. He understood that wisdom lies not in the rigidity of our beliefs, but in the quality of our relationship to them. The practice of intellectual humility requires what we might call courageous uncertainty, the willingness to say, "I don't know," in a culture that rewards false confidence. The strength to change your mind when presented with better information. The grace to admit when you have been wrong. These capacities are not signs of weakness, but of genuine strength. The kind of strength that comes from preferring truth to ego, understanding to winning. In our current moment, when certainty has become a form of performance and nuance is often mistaken for weakness, Montaigne's approach feels revolutionary. He reminds us that the most interesting conversations happen not when people are defending fixed positions, but when they are exploring questions together. Not when minds are closed, but when they are genuinely open to being changed. This openness transforms not only how we think, but how we relate to others. When you stop needing to be right about everything, you become safer for others to be uncertain with. When you admit your own ignorance, you give others permission to do the same. When you approach disagreement with curiosity rather than combat, you create space for the kind of dialogue that can actually bridge differences rather than simply revealing them. The wisdom of uncertainty also changes how we respond to failure and mistake-making. When we acknowledge that our knowledge is always partial, our perspective always limited, our understanding always evolving, then errors become information rather than indictments. They become opportunities for learning rather than evidence of inadequacy. This shift is not merely psychological, it is practical, creating the conditions under which actual learning becomes possible. As we continue this exploration together, we carry with us Montaigne's gentle invitation to embrace the questions that have no easy answers, to find freedom in the space between certainty and confusion, to discover that not knowing might be the beginning of genuine wisdom rather than its absence. We are all born naked, vulnerable, and utterly ourselves. Then the world begins its well-intentioned work of teaching us who we should be instead. By the time we reach adulthood, most of us have accumulated so many layers of conditioning, expectation, and performance that we have forgotten what it feels like to simply be rather than to be someone in particular. Montaigne's greatest gift to us may be his demonstration that underneath all these acquired personas lies something worth discovering: our natural form. You know, the exhaustion of code switching, the way you slightly alter your voice when speaking to your boss, the way you edit your thoughts before sharing them at family dinners, the way you present different versions of yourself on different social media platforms. This is not necessarily dishonesty. Sometimes social sensitivity requires different facets of ourselves to come forward in different contexts. But when the performance becomes so habitual that we lose touch with what we actually think and feel, we have moved from social grace into self-alienation. Montaigne wrote, "I am myself the matter of my book," and in doing so he performed perhaps history's first great act of radical self-acceptance in literature. He did not present himself as he thought he should be, or as others expected him to be, but as he actually was: contradictory, changeable, sometimes petty, sometimes noble, always human. This was not narcissism, but its opposite, a form of attention so honest and so thorough that it transcended the personal and became universal. The ancient Greek maxim, "Know thyself," was inscribed at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, suggesting that self-knowledge was considered a sacred pursuit. But this knowing was not meant to be theoretical, it was practical wisdom for living. How can you make good decisions if you do not understand your own motivations? How can you build authentic relationships if you are not clear about your own values? How can you contribute meaningfully to the world if you are trying to be someone you are not? The process of discovering your authentic self is not a matter of digging down to some fixed essence that has been there all along. Montaigne understood that the self is not a thing but a process, not a noun but a verb. "I do not paint the being," he wrote. "I paint the passage." He recognized that authenticity is not about finding the one true version of yourself, but about becoming intimate with the process by which you continually become yourself. This understanding liberates us from the perfectionist's trap of trying to construct an ideal self, and instead invites us into the more interesting work of observing, accepting, and gently directing our actual selves. It means paying attention to what genuinely energizes you versus what you think should energize you. It means noticing which relationships bring out your best qualities and which ones require you to diminish yourself to maintain them. It means distinguishing between values you have chosen and values that were chosen for you. The courage required for this kind of self-honesty cannot be underestimated. It means acknowledging desires you have been taught to be ashamed of, admitting fears you have been told are irrational, owning anger you have been conditioned to suppress. It means recognizing that some of the stories you have told about yourself may be more about who you thought you needed to be than who you actually are. But this courage pays profound dividends. When you stop trying to be someone else's version of a good person and start becoming your own version, you discover reserves of energy you did not know you possessed. When you stop performing emotions you think you should feel and start honoring emotions you actually feel, you develop the kind of emotional intelligence that serves both yourself and others. When you stop trying to want what you think you should want and start pursuing what genuinely calls to you, you often find that your unique contributions to the world become clear. Montaigne's approach to authenticity was neither confessional nor exhibitionist. He did not believe that being authentic meant sharing every thought or feeling with everyone around him. Instead, he cultivated what we might call inner clarity, a relationship with himself that was honest enough to serve as a reliable foundation for decisions, relationships, and creative work. This inner clarity included accepting what he called his natural form, not as an excuse for laziness or selfishness, but as recognition that trying to be fundamentally different from who you are is both exhausting and ineffective. Just as a river finds its natural course by following the path of least resistance while still moving toward its destination, authentic living means working with your nature rather than against it while still growing in the directions that serve your deepest values. The sociologist Brené Brown writes about the difference between fitting in and belonging. Fitting in requires you to change who you are to be accepted, while belonging allows you to be accepted for who you are. Montaigne understood this distinction centuries before it was formally articulated. He recognized that the communities and relationships worth having are those that welcome your authentic self, while those that require you to be someone else may offer acceptance but never true belonging. This does not mean that authentic living is always comfortable, or that it exempts us from the ordinary work of being considerate, reliable, and kind. Montaigne was not advocating for radical individualism or social irresponsibility. Rather, he was pointing toward a way of being that is both deeply personal and genuinely social, rooted in self-knowledge but expressed through generous engagement with others. The process of reclaiming authenticity often involves what psychologists call unlearning, identifying and releasing patterns of thought and behavior that were adaptive in past contexts but no longer serve us. This might mean questioning career choices made to please parents, examining relationship patterns that repeat family dynamics, or challenging beliefs about success and failure that were absorbed from cultural messaging rather than personal experience. As we move deeper into this exploration, we carry with us Montaigne's invitation to become archaeologists of our own experience, to gently excavate the authentic self that exists beneath the accumulated layers of conditioning and performance, to discover that who we actually are is more interesting and more valuable than any version we could construct to please others. In a world that has mistaken constant connection for community and perpetual stimulation for aliveness, there is something both revolutionary and restorative about learning to be alone with yourself without feeling lonely, anxious, or bored. Montaigne understood that solitude is not the absence of others but the presence of yourself, a space where you can hear your own thoughts, feel your own feelings, and discover what remains when the noise of social performance finally quiets. You have experienced both kinds of aloneness, the loneliness that feels like exile, where your own company feels inadequate, and you count the minutes until you can distract yourself again, and the solitude that feels like homecoming, where you settle into yourself like sinking into a comfortable chair after a long day. The difference between these experiences is not circumstantial but psychological. It depends not on whether others are present, but on whether you are present to yourself. Montaigne spent considerable time alone in his tower library. Not because he was antisocial, he deeply valued friendship and engaged actively in the social and political life of his time, but because he understood that without periodic withdrawal from the opinions, expectations, and energy of others, it becomes difficult to distinguish between what you actually think and what you think you should think. Solitude was his laboratory for self-discovery. The ancient contemplatives spoke of what they called the cell, not necessarily a physical space, but a psychological sanctuary where one could encounter the deeper currents of consciousness that are often drowned out by social interaction. This cell was not a place of punishment, but of purification, not isolation, but integration. In solitude, the scattered pieces of experience could settle into patterns of meaning. But our contemporary relationship to solitude has been complicated by technology that promises connection while often delivering its opposite. We carry devices that can summon entertainment, information, or social interaction at any moment, making genuine solitude increasingly rare. Even when physically alone, we often remain psychologically scattered, toggling between apps, scrolling through feeds, consuming content created by others, rather than creating space for our own inner content to emerge. The practice of true solitude requires what we might call digital fasting periods of deliberate disconnection from the streams of external input that keep us perpetually reactive rather than reflective. This is not about becoming a hermit or rejecting technology entirely, but about creating space for the kind of deep processing that only happens when the mind is not constantly being fed new information to digest. In these spaces of genuine solitude, something remarkable occurs. You begin to notice the quality of your own mental atmosphere. Without the constant mirror of others' responses, you start to sense your own emotional weather patterns. You notice which thoughts create stress and which ones bring peace. You become aware of the stories you tell yourself about yourself, and you begin to distinguish between stories that serve your growth and stories that keep you stuck. Montaigne discovered that in solitude, he could observe his own mind with the same curiosity he brought to observing the world around him. He noticed his inconsistencies without judging them harshly, his changing opinions without feeling shame about their mutability, his fears and desires without immediately trying to fix or fulfill them. This quality of self-observation, interested but not anxious, honest but not harsh, became one of his greatest strengths as both a thinker and a human being. The fear of solitude often stems from the fear of what we might discover about ourselves when we are not performing for others. What if we are boring? What if our thoughts are not as interesting as we pretend? What if we discover feelings we have been avoiding or desires we have been denying? These fears are understandable, but they are also invitations, opportunities to develop a more honest and ultimately more sustainable relationship with ourselves. The irony is that people who are comfortable in their own company often make the best companions for others. They are not constantly seeking external validation or entertainment. They can be present to others' experiences without immediately relating everything back to themselves. They can tolerate quiet moments in conversation without feeling compelled to fill them with chatter. Their sense of self is not dependent on others' responses, which creates space for more authentic connection. Montaigne's practice of solitude was not about withdrawal from life, but about engaging more deeply with life. By spending time alone with his thoughts, he developed the kind of self-knowledge that made his social interactions more genuine. By processing his experiences in private, he could share them more generously in public. By learning to be good company for himself, he became better company for others. The cultivation of solitude as a spiritual practice, not religious necessarily, but having to do with the spirit, the inner life. The part of us that remains when roles and relationships are stripped away requires patience and gentleness. Like any skill, it develops gradually. At first, you might feel restless, anxious to return to the stimulation and distraction of social engagement. This restlessness is not a sign that solitude is wrong for you, but that you have become unaccustomed to your own company. The practice begins simply, small periods of time with no external input, no agenda other than being present to whatever arises in consciousness. This might be sitting quietly with a cup of tea, walking without podcasts or music, or simply lying in bed for a few minutes after waking without immediately reaching for your phone. These moments of pause create space for the inner voice that speaks more quietly than the outer world, but often more wisely. As we continue this journey together, we carry with us Montaigne's understanding that solitude is not selfish but generous, a way of taking responsibility for our own inner weather so that we can meet others from a place of fullness rather than need, presence rather than performance, authenticity rather than anxiety. There comes a moment in every honest life when you realize that you have been carrying things that were never yours to carry: other people's expectations, inherited definitions of success, accumulated resentments that serve no purpose except to make the past perpetually present. Montaigne understood that wisdom often consists not in acquiring more, but in releasing what no longer serves, not in holding on more tightly, but in learning the art of strategic surrender. You know the weight of unnecessary baggage. It lives in the mental energy you spend rehearsing conversations with people who hurt you years ago, in the ways you still try to prove yourself to critics who may have forgotten their criticism, in the dreams you pursue not because they call to you, but because abandoning them would feel like admitting failure. This weight is not just psychological, it has physical consequences, emotional costs, spiritual implications that ripple through every aspect of life. The practice of letting go that Montaigne embodied was not passive resignation, but active discernment, the ability to distinguish between what deserves your energy and what merely demands it, between commitments that align with your values and obligations that drain your vitality, between relationships that nourish mutual growth and connections that exist primarily out of habit or guilt. In his essay of Repentance, Montaigne wrote about the futility of excessive regret. "I rarely repent, and my conscience is satisfied with itself." This was not callousness, but wisdom. He understood that while reflection on past mistakes is valuable for learning, endless rumination on what cannot be changed is a form of self-torture that prevents us from fully engaging with present opportunities. The ancient Stoics spoke of the discipline of desire, the practice of wanting what happens, rather than demanding that what happens conform to what we want. This is not fatalism, but a profound reorientation of our relationship to reality. Instead of exhausting ourselves trying to force life into our preferred configurations, we can learn to find meaning, beauty, and opportunity within whatever configurations actually arise. This shift requires what we might call existential courage, the willingness to live in a universe that does not bend to our will, to find meaning in circumstances we did not choose, to create beauty within constraints we cannot eliminate. It is the recognition that freedom comes not from controlling outcomes, but from choosing our responses to whatever outcomes occur. Consider the energy you spend trying to change people who have shown no interest in changing. Notice the mental loops you create by replaying situations you wish had gone differently. Observe how much of your present attention is consumed by past grievances or future anxieties that exist only in your imagination. Montaigne would gently suggest that this energy could be redirected toward more creative and satisfying purposes. The practice of letting go often begins with what psychologists call radical acceptance, the complete acknowledgement of what is actually happening without the overlay of how we think things should be happening. This is not about liking everything that occurs, but about stopping the additional suffering that comes from resisting reality. As the saying goes, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. But letting go in Montaigne's sense goes deeper than acceptance. It moves toward what we might call conscious release. This means actively choosing to stop investing emotional energy in situations that cannot be changed, people who do not want to be helped, outcomes that are beyond our influence. It means withdrawing our attention from mental habits that create stress without producing insight. This process often requires grieving, mourning the loss of dreams that will not come true, relationships that cannot be repaired, versions of ourselves that we will never become. Montaigne understood that grief is not just about death, but about all the forms of loss that accompany growth, all the things we must leave behind in order to move forward. The paradox of letting go is that it often leads to having more, not less. When you stop trying to control your adult children's choices, you often end up with better relationships with them. When you release attachment to specific career outcomes, you often discover opportunities you could not have planned. When you stop clinging to relationships that require you to be someone you are not, you create space for connections that appreciate who you actually are. This is not magical thinking, but practical psychology. When we release the energy bound up in futile resistance, that energy becomes available for creative response. When we stop fighting battles that cannot be won, we can engage more fully in challenges where our efforts can make a difference. When we let go of the past and future, we can be more present to the opportunities available right now. Montaigne's approach to letting go was neither dramatic nor complete. He did not advocate for eliminating all preferences or attachments, but for holding them lightly. He cared deeply about friendship, literature, and the welfare of his community. But he did not make his happiness dependent on controlling how these things unfolded. He engaged fully while remaining inwardly free. The practice of strategic surrender requires ongoing discernment. It means regularly asking yourself, what am I holding on to that no longer serves me? What battles am I fighting that drain my energy without producing meaningful results? What stories am I telling myself about the past that prevent me from fully engaging with the present? What expectations am I carrying that create frustration without inspiring effective action? These questions are not meant to be answered once, but revisited regularly, like clearing out a closet or tending a garden. Just as physical possessions accumulate over time and require periodic sorting, emotional and psychological attachments also accumulate and benefit from conscious curation. As we move deeper into this exploration of Montaigne's liberating philosophy, we carry with us his understanding that letting go is not loss but liberation, not emptiness but spaciousness, not giving up but making room for what wants to emerge in the space that release creates. There exists a peculiar form of suffering that is entirely self-imposed, the anguish of trying to be loved by everyone. You have felt this burden. The way it shapes your words before you speak them, edits your authentic responses into socially acceptable ones, and leaves you exhausted from the constant performance of being who you think others want you to be. Montaigne discovered something that modern psychology has only recently begun to understand: that the attempt to be universally liked is not only impossible but actively prevents the kind of deep connection that makes life meaningful. In his essay, Of the Inconsistency of Our Actions, Montaigne wrote with characteristic honesty about his own contradictions, his changing moods, his capacity to be both generous and petty, wise and foolish, sometimes within the same day. He did not try to present himself as consistently likable, but as consistently human. This radical honesty inevitably meant that some people would find him difficult, puzzling, or simply not to their taste, and he made peace with this reality. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who understood human nature from the particular vantage point of having been enslaved and then freed, taught that we cannot control what others think of us, only what we think of ourselves. But Montaigne took this insight further, recognizing that even the desire to control others' opinions is a form of slavery, a voluntary surrender of our inner freedom to external forces we can never fully predict or manage. Consider how much of your daily energy is consumed by the project of reputation management. Notice how you craft social media posts not just to express yourself but to maintain a certain image. Observe how you modify your opinions in different groups, not out of genuine persuasion, but out of the desire to remain acceptable to everyone. Watch how you sometimes betray your own values in small ways to avoid the discomfort of disapproval. This is not entirely your fault. Human beings are social creatures who evolved in small groups where social rejection could literally mean death. Our nervous systems still respond to social disapproval as if it were a physical threat, flooding us with stress hormones that were appropriate when exile from the tribe meant facing saber-toothed tigers alone, but are less helpful when the threat is someone disagreeing with our political views on the internet. But recognizing the evolutionary basis of our approval-seeking does not mean we are doomed to remain trapped by it. Montaigne demonstrated that it is possible to care about others' welfare without being controlled by their opinions, to value social harmony without sacrificing personal integrity, to be kind without being constantly compliant. The path toward this freedom begins with what we might call existential arithmetic, the recognition that it is mathematically impossible to be loved by everyone. Even the most universally admired figures in history have their critics, their detractors, their people who simply find them irritating. Jesus had enemies. Buddha had critics. Mother Teresa was controversial in some circles. If these paragons of virtue could not achieve universal approval, what makes us think we can? More importantly, the attempt to be liked by everyone requires you to be no one in particular. When you edit all your rough edges, when you suppress all your controversial opinions, when you avoid taking any stands that might create conflict, you become a kind of human vanilla, pleasant enough, but ultimately forgettable. People may not dislike you, but they may not really know you either. Montaigne understood that authentic connection requires the willingness to be genuinely seen, which inevitably means being genuinely disliked by some people. He wrote about his friendships with stunning honesty, acknowledging that even the people who knew him best sometimes found him exasperating. But it was precisely this honesty that made his friendships so deep and meaningful. The courage to be disliked is not the same as the desire to be disliked that would be simple contrarianism. Another form of defining yourself in reaction to others rather than from your own center. Nor is it licensed to be unnecessarily difficult, rude, or inconsiderate. It is simply the recognition that if you are living authentically, expressing your genuine thoughts and feelings, and standing for what you believe in, some people will not appreciate you, and this is not only acceptable but inevitable. This recognition has profound practical implications. It means you can stop the exhausting work of trying to anticipate and manage everyone's reactions to your choices. It means you can speak truthfully in conversations instead of saying what you think people want to hear. It means you can pursue work that feels meaningful to you, even if others do not understand your choices. It means you can end relationships that require you to diminish yourself, even if ending them disappoints people you care about. The paradox that Montaigne discovered, and that researchers in social psychology have since confirmed, is that people who are willing to be disliked are often more likable than those who desperately seek approval. There is something magnetic about authenticity, something attractive about people who are clearly comfortable in their own skin. We trust people who are willing to disagree with us more than people who agree with everything we say. This happens because authentic people are safer to be authentic around. When someone is not constantly managing their image, it creates space for others to relax their own performance. When someone is willing to admit their flaws and mistakes, it gives others permission to be human too. When someone stands for something, even if we disagree with what they stand for, we at least know where we stand with them. The practice of developing this courage begins small. It might mean expressing a genuine opinion in a conversation where you would normally stay neutral. It might mean saying no to a request that does not align with your values, even if saying no disappoints someone. It might mean sharing creative work that feels personal and vulnerable, even knowing that some people will not appreciate it. Each time you choose authenticity over approval, you build what we might call integrity muscles, the internal strength that comes from aligning your actions with your values regardless of external rewards or punishments. These muscles, like physical muscles, grow stronger with use and make future acts of courage easier. Montaigne also understood that the courage to be disliked must be balanced with genuine care for others' well-being. The goal is not to become indifferent to others' feelings, but to distinguish between appropriate consideration and self-betrayal. You can be kind without being fake, honest without being cruel, authentic without being selfish. The freedom that emerges from this courage is profound. When you no longer need everyone to like you, you can focus your energy on being genuinely helpful to the people whose opinions you actually value. When you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you can become something meaningful to someone. When you release the impossible goal of universal approval, you discover the possible joy of genuine connection with those who appreciate you for who you actually are. As we continue this exploration together, we carry with us Montaigne's gentle but radical invitation to trade the exhausting pursuit of universal likability for the more sustainable and satisfying work of being authentically yourself, trusting that the people worth knowing will find their way to you. In the marketplace of human desires, where advertising algorithms study our psychological vulnerabilities more thoroughly than we study ourselves, where social media turns every aspect of life into a competition for attention and status, there is something profoundly countercultural about the simple recognition that you already have enough. Not enough of everything, perhaps, but enough to live well, to contribute meaningfully, to experience the satisfaction that comes from appreciating what is, rather than constantly reaching for what is not yet. Montaigne lived during the Renaissance, an era of expanding possibilities, new discoveries, increasing wealth for some and devastating poverty for others. Yet rather than being swept up in the cultural obsession with accumulation and advancement, he found contentment in what he called his sufficiency. Not because he lacked ambition, but because he understood that enough is not a number, but a feeling, not an external condition, but an internal state. You know the feeling of enough when it arises, the moment when you stop scrolling through your phone because you have seen sufficient content for now, the satisfaction of finishing a meal when you are full rather than when the plate is empty, the peace that comes from having a clean, organized space that serves your needs without overwhelming you with excess. These moments point toward a different way of being in the world, one that measures wealth by contentment rather than accumulation. The ancient Greek philosophers distinguished between natural desires and empty desires. Natural desires for food, shelter, companionship, meaningful work can be satisfied and bring genuine pleasure when fulfilled. Empty desires for fame, immortality, unlimited wealth, perfect control over others cannot be satisfied because they have no natural limits. They are like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No amount of input will create lasting fullness. Modern consumer culture deliberately confuses these categories, encouraging us to treat empty desires as if they were natural needs. The messages are subtle but persistent. You need not just a phone but the latest phone, not just clothing but fashionable clothing, not just transportation but impressive transportation, not just work but work that others admire. The goal is to keep us perpetually unsatisfied, always reaching for the next purchase, achievement, or experience that will finally provide the contentment that seems always just out of reach. Montaigne's approach to this predicament was neither ascetic rejection of all pleasure, nor unconscious participation in the cultural trance of consumption. Instead, he practiced what we might call conscious satisfaction, the art of recognizing when your genuine needs are met and your authentic desires fulfilled, regardless of what others might think about the simplicity or modesty of your choices. This practice requires developing what Buddhist psychology calls discriminating awareness, the ability to distinguish between wanting something because you genuinely need or would enjoy it, and wanting something because you have been conditioned to want it. It means asking yourself questions like, do I actually want this? Or do I want the feeling I imagine having this will give me? Am I buying this to solve a real problem, or to solve an imaginary inadequacy? Will acquiring this object or experience actually improve my life, or am I hoping it will improve how others perceive my life? The wisdom of enough extends beyond material possessions to every area of human experience. How much achievement is enough to feel successful? How much approval is enough to feel valued? How much control is enough to feel secure? How much stimulation is enough to feel entertained? These questions do not have universal answers, but they have personal answers that can only be discovered through honest self-examination. Montaigne found that when he stopped chasing more and started appreciating what is, his capacity for genuine pleasure actually increased. Food tasted better when he ate because he was hungry rather than because it was time to eat. Conversations were more satisfying when he engaged because he was interested rather than because social protocol demanded it. Work was more fulfilling when he pursued projects that matched his abilities and interests rather than trying to meet others' expectations about what he should accomplish. This shift from scarcity thinking to abundance awareness, recognizing the abundance that already exists rather than focusing on what is missing, has profound psychological effects. Research in positive psychology has shown that people who regularly practice gratitude, who notice and appreciate what they already have, report higher levels of life satisfaction than those who focus primarily on goals and acquisitions. But the practice of enough is not always comfortable, especially in the beginning. It requires facing the anxiety that consumer culture both creates and promises to solve the fear that without constant striving and accumulating, we will somehow fall behind, miss out, or fail to reach our potential. It means tolerating the social pressure that comes from choosing simplicity in a culture that equates success with excess. Montaigne discovered that this discomfort is temporary and instructive. The anxiety that arises when we stop the constant pursuit of more is often not really about the things we are not pursuing, but about underlying fears of inadequacy, rejection, or meaninglessness that no amount of external acquisition can actually address. When we learn to sit with these fears rather than immediately trying to solve them through consumption or achievement, we often discover that they have less power over us than we imagined. The practice of enough also reveals how much energy becomes available when we stop the constant mental work of wanting what we do not have. The attention that was consumed by researching purchases, comparing options, managing possessions, and striving for achievements becomes available for more creative and satisfying pursuits, deeper relationships, meaningful work, appreciation of beauty, engagement with ideas that matter. This does not mean abandoning all goals or becoming complacent about growth and improvement. Montaigne was not advocating for stagnation, but for what we might call sustainable ambition, pursuing meaningful goals from a place of contentment rather than inadequacy, expanding your capacities and contributions from a foundation of self-acceptance rather than self-rejection. The wisdom of enough also transforms how we relate to others. When we are not constantly comparing our possessions, achievements, or experiences to theirs, we can appreciate their successes without feeling diminished by them. When we are not trying to impress others with what we have, we can connect with them more authentically around who we are. When we are not competing for scarce resources, status, attention, approval, we can collaborate more generously towards shared goals. As we continue this journey through Montaigne's liberating philosophy, we carry with us his quiet confidence that satisfaction is not something to be achieved, but something to be recognized, not a destination to reach, but a perspective to adopt, not a reward for having more, but a gift available to anyone willing to appreciate what they already possess. There is a profound difference between running away from life and stepping back to gain perspective on it. Montaigne understood this distinction intimately, having spent portions of his life engaged in the tumultuous politics of 16th century France and other portions withdrawn to his tower study, reading, writing, and thinking. He discovered that the art of strategic withdrawal, knowing when to engage and when to step back, is essential for maintaining both sanity and wisdom in a world that often seems designed to overwhelm us. You have felt the weight of overstimulation, the way modern life can feel like drinking from a fire hose of information, obligations, and social interactions. The emails that demand immediate responses, the news cycles that create artificial urgency about events you cannot influence, the social commitments that multiply faster than hours in the day. In such an environment, the ability to withdraw strategically is not antisocial but self-preserving, not selfish but necessary for maintaining the inner resources that allow you to engage meaningfully when engagement is called for. Montaigne's withdrawal was not escape but preparation. His time alone allowed him to process experiences, integrate learning, and return to social interaction with greater clarity and presence. He understood that constant engagement without periods of reflection leads to what we might call experiential indigestion. Accumulating experiences without extracting their meaning, gathering information without developing wisdom, maintaining relationships without deepening understanding. The ancient tradition of Sabbath, a regular period of rest and withdrawal from ordinary activities, recognizes this fundamental human need for rhythm in engagement. Even the earth itself follows patterns of activity and rest, growth and dormancy, expansion and contraction. To live in constant expansion without periods of contraction is to violate natural rhythms that exist for good reasons. But strategic withdrawal in our current context requires more than just taking weekends off or annual vacations. It requires what we might call micro-withdrawals throughout each day. Moments of pause between activities, periods of silence between conversations, spaces of stillness between stimulations. These brief withdrawals allow the nervous system to reset, the mind to process, the spirit to catch up with the pace of living. The practice begins with recognizing the difference between solitude and isolation. Isolation is withdrawal motivated by fear, resentment, or inability to cope with social interaction. Solitude is withdrawal motivated by wisdom, self-care, and the desire to return to others with greater presence and authenticity. Isolation depletes, solitude restores. Montaigne's strategic withdrawals served multiple purposes. They allowed him to escape the noise of others' opinions and reconnect with his own thoughts and feelings. They provided space for the kind of deep reflection that is impossible amid constant social interaction. They offered relief from the performance of social roles and the opportunity to simply be rather than be someone in particular. In our hyperconnected age, such withdrawal requires more intentionality than it did in Montaigne's time. The devices in our pockets ensure that we are never truly alone unless we choose to be. The streams of social media, news, and entertainment are designed to be addictive, to create the feeling that we are missing something important if we are not constantly checking in. The fear of missing out has become a genuine psychological syndrome that keeps many people in a state of perpetual partial attention. Strategic withdrawal means developing the capacity to disconnect from these streams of input when disconnection serves your well-being and effectiveness. It means creating what we might call sacred boundaries around time, attention, and energy. It means learning to say no to opportunities, invitations, and obligations that would prevent you from maintaining the inner spaciousness necessary for creativity, reflection, and genuine connection. This practice often requires overcoming cultural programming that equates busyness with importance, constant availability with dedication, and social withdrawal with weakness or selfishness. In many professional environments, taking time for reflection is seen as less valuable than taking action, even when reflection might lead to better actions. In many social contexts, choosing solitude is interpreted as rejection or antisocial behavior, even when solitude might enhance the quality of future social interactions. Montaigne's example offers an alternative model: withdrawal as a form of social responsibility. By taking time to process his experiences, examine his assumptions, and clarify his values, he was able to contribute more thoughtfully to the political and social issues of his time. His essays, written during periods of withdrawal, have influenced millions of readers across centuries, a contribution that would not have been possible if he had remained constantly engaged in the immediate demands of social and political life. The art of strategic withdrawal also includes learning to withdraw from internal states that do not serve you. Just as you might step away from a heated argument to cool down, you can learn to step back from mental patterns that create unnecessary suffering. When you notice yourself caught in loops of worry, resentment, or self-criticism, withdrawal means neither suppressing these states nor indulging them, but simply stepping back and observing them with the kind of interested detachment that Montaigne brought to all aspects of human experience. This internal withdrawal is perhaps even more challenging than external withdrawal, because our thoughts and emotions feel so immediate, so urgent, so much like us, that stepping back from them can feel like self-abandonment. But Montaigne discovered that we are not our thoughts, any more than we are our social roles. We are the awareness that observes thoughts, the consciousness that experiences emotions, the deeper self that remains present through all the changing states of mind and circumstance. The practice of strategic withdrawal becomes a form of meditation in daily life, not the formal meditation that requires sitting still for prescribed periods, but the informal meditation of regularly stepping back from the immediacy of experience to gain perspective on it. This might happen during a walk in nature, a few minutes of quiet breathing, or simply pausing before responding to emails or engaging in conversations. The goal is not to withdraw from life, but to engage with life more skillfully. Like a painter who steps back from the canvas to see the whole composition, strategic withdrawal allows us to see patterns and possibilities that are invisible when we are caught up in the immediate details of daily experience. It creates space for the kind of perspective that transforms problems into opportunities, conflicts into understanding, and challenges into growth. As we continue exploring Montaigne's path to freedom, we carry with us his understanding that wisdom requires rhythm periods of engagement, balanced by periods of withdrawal, social interaction balanced by solitude, action balanced by reflection. The art lies not in choosing one over the other, but in developing the sensitivity to know which is called for in each moment. Within the chambers of every honest human heart lives a multitude that would embarrass any politician seeking a consistent platform. You are simultaneously brave and cowardly, generous and selfish, wise and foolish, often within the span of a single conversation. Montaigne made peace with this multiplicity in a way that was revolutionary for his time and remains radical for ours. Instead of trying to resolve his contradictions, he embraced them as evidence of his humanity rather than proof of his inadequacy. In his essay, Of the Inconsistency of Our Actions, Montaigne wrote with characteristic directness, "We are all patchwork, and so shapeless and diverse in composition that each bit, each moment, plays its own game. This was not confession but celebration, recognition that the attempt to be perfectly consistent is not only impossible but would actually diminish us if it were achievable. You know this multiplicity intimately. The way you can feel profound compassion for strangers while being impatient with family members. The way you can be confident in professional settings and insecure in social ones. The way you can hold strong political convictions while recognizing the validity of opposing viewpoints. The way you can be simultaneously grateful for your life and frustrated by its limitations. These contradictions are not flaws to be fixed, but facets of a complex consciousness that refuses to be reduced to simple categories. The human tendency to demand consistency from ourselves and others stems partly from a misunderstanding of what maturity means. We imagine that grown-ups should have figured everything out, should hold stable opinions about complex issues, should respond predictably to similar situations. But Montaigne understood that real maturity might look more like sophisticated inconsistency, the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to respond freshly to each situation rather than applying predetermined formulas to change our minds when new information or experience warrants it. This insight has profound implications for how we judge ourselves and others. How much energy do you spend trying to reconcile contradictory aspects of your personality? How often do you dismiss someone else's valid point because it seems inconsistent with their previous positions? How frequently do you edit your authentic responses to maintain an image of coherent selfhood that does not actually reflect the rich complexity of your inner experience? The ancient Greek poet Walt Whitman captured this beautifully. Do I contradict myself? Very well then. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Montaigne would have appreciated this sentiment, though he might have added that we contain not just multitudes but multitudes that do not always get along with each other, that argue among themselves, that take turns being in charge of our responses to the world. The practice of embracing contradiction begins with what we might call gentle self-observation, watching your own inconsistencies with the same kind curiosity you might bring to watching clouds change shape. Notice how your mood affects your opinions, how your energy level influences your values, how your current circumstances color your memories of past events. This observation is not meant to judge but to appreciate the dynamic, fluid nature of consciousness. One of the most liberating aspects of accepting contradiction is that it frees you from the exhausting work of maintaining a perfectly coherent persona. When you acknowledge that you are sometimes petty and sometimes noble, sometimes clear and sometimes confused, sometimes confident and sometimes doubtful, you can respond to each situation from whatever aspect of yourself is most appropriate rather than from whatever aspect maintains consistency with yesterday's version of yourself. This flexibility has practical applications in relationships, work, and creative endeavors. In relationships, it allows you to apologize genuinely when you behave badly without feeling that the apology threatens your identity as a good person. At work, it enables you to admit when you are wrong without experiencing it as professional catastrophe. In creative work, it permits you to explore ideas that seem to contradict your established style or beliefs without feeling that you are betraying your artistic integrity. Montaigne also understood that embracing contradiction does not mean abandoning all standards or principles. He maintained strong values, friendship, honesty, tolerance, intellectual humility, while recognizing that the application of these values would vary depending on circumstances. He was consistently inconsistent, reliably flexible, principled in his refusal to be bound by rigid principles. The fear of contradiction often stems from a misunderstanding of authenticity. We imagine that being authentic means always responding in the same way, having unchanging opinions, maintaining a stable personality across all contexts. But authentic might actually mean being genuinely responsive to what each moment requires, allowing your full range of human capacities to emerge as they are needed, rather than limiting yourself to a narrow band of acceptable responses. This understanding transforms how we relate to personal growth and change. Instead of seeing evolution in your thinking as evidence of earlier mistakes, you can appreciate it as evidence of ongoing learning. Instead of feeling shame about outgrowing previous versions of yourself, you can feel gratitude for your capacity to develop. Instead of trying to honor commitments that no longer serve anyone involved, You can acknowledge that circumstances change and adaptation is often more responsible than rigid consistency. The dance of contradiction also applies to how we hold our beliefs and opinions. Montaigne demonstrated that it is possible to hold strong convictions while remaining genuinely open to new information. He could advocate passionately for tolerance while admitting uncertainty about many moral and philosophical questions. He could commit fully to relationships and responsibilities while maintaining inner freedom from attachment to specific outcomes. This capacity for what we might call passionate non-attachment allows for a different quality of engagement with life's challenges. You can work diligently toward goals while remaining open to the possibility that the goals might change. You can love deeply while accepting that love sometimes means letting go. You can stand firmly for your values while recognizing that your understanding of those values will continue to evolve. The practice of embracing contradiction also includes learning to hold space for others' inconsistencies without immediately trying to point them out or resolve them. How often do relationships suffer because we demand that others be more consistent than we are ourselves? How many arguments arise not from genuine disagreement, but from the refusal to accept that people can hold apparently contradictory positions simultaneously? Montaigne's approach suggests that wisdom lies not in eliminating contradictions, but in learning to dance with them gracefully. This dance requires balance, not the static balance of perfect stability, but the dynamic balance of constant adjustment, like riding a bicycle or walking a tightrope. It means leaning into different aspects of yourself, as circumstances require, while maintaining an overall sense of direction and purpose. As we continue this exploration of liberation through acceptance, we carry with us Montaigne's gentle invitation to befriend our own complexity, to appreciate the multifaceted nature of human consciousness, to find freedom not in resolving all contradictions, but in learning to live creatively within the beautiful, maddening, endlessly fascinating multiplicity of being human. Nothing lasts forever, including the problems that feel infinite when you are inside them. This simple truth, which Montaigne contemplated throughout his essays with a mixture of melancholy and relief, offers both the sobering recognition of life's fragility and the liberating understanding that whatever difficulties you currently face will eventually pass. The courage to live fully requires accepting impermanence, not as life's limitation but as its essential characteristic. You have experienced both sides of this truth. The way sorrow that seemed unbearable gradually softened into something manageable. The way intense love evolved into comfortable companionship or gentle memory. The way career crises that felt catastrophic eventually became stories you tell about your growth. The way physical pain that dominated your attention simply disappeared one day without ceremony. Impermanence is not just a philosophical concept, but a lived reality that you can observe in every area of your experience. Montaigne lived during a time of particular instability, religious wars, political upheaval, plague, personal loss. Yet rather than being overwhelmed by the uncertainty of his circumstances, he found in impermanence a kind of comfort. If nothing lasts forever, then suffering is temporary. If all conditions are subject to change, then despair is not a permanent state. If even the most solid-seeming structures eventually crumble, then the pressure to create something permanent is revealed as a form of unnecessary self-torture. The Buddhist tradition speaks of impermanence as one of the three fundamental characteristics of existence, alongside suffering and the absence of a fixed self. But Montaigne arrived at similar insights through personal observation rather than religious teaching. He watched his own body age, his thoughts evolve, his relationships change, and found in these changes not reasons for despair, but evidence of life's dynamic nature. This perspective radically alters how we relate to both pleasant and unpleasant experiences. When something wonderful is happening, the recognition of impermanence can deepen appreciation rather than creating anxiety about loss. Knowing that this moment will not last forever can intensify the gratitude we feel for having it at all. When something difficult is happening, the same recognition can provide hope and patience rather than the despair that comes from imagining that current conditions will persist indefinitely. The courage of impermanence manifests in multiple ways. It requires accepting that every relationship will eventually end, either through natural evolution, geographical separation, or death, and choosing to love fully anyway. It means investing energy in projects and causes that matter to you, while knowing that all your efforts will eventually be forgotten. and finding meaning in the effort itself, rather than in imagined permanent results. Consider how much of your suffering comes from resisting change that is already happening. Notice how you sometimes cling to versions of yourself that you have outgrown, relationships that have run their natural course, or situations that no longer serve your growth. Observe how much mental energy you spend trying to make permanent what is inherently temporary: your current level of health, the dynamics of your family relationships, the satisfaction you find in particular activities or achievements. Montaigne's approach to impermanence was neither to fight it nor to surrender to it passively, but to dance with it consciously. He understood that while we cannot prevent change, we can influence how we relate to change. We can resist transitions and make them more painful than they need to be, or we can learn to move with them gracefully, finding opportunities within what initially appears to be loss. This dance requires what we might call temporal wisdom, the ability to live fully in the present while acknowledging that the present is constantly becoming the past. It means being completely engaged with current circumstances while holding them lightly, knowing that engagement and attachment are different things. You can care deeply about outcomes while accepting that you cannot control how long those outcomes will last. The fear of impermanence often drives us toward desperate attempts at permanence that create their own forms of suffering. We try to freeze relationships at their peak moments instead of allowing them to evolve naturally. We cling to identities and roles that once served us but now feel constrictive. We accumulate possessions and achievements as if quantity could somehow provide the security that quality, by its very nature, cannot guarantee. But Montaigne discovered that accepting impermanence actually enhances rather than diminishes life's value. The flower is beautiful partly because it blooms briefly. The sunset is precious partly because darkness follows. The conversation with a friend is meaningful partly because you know you will not have infinite such conversations. Scarcity creates value in a way that abundance sometimes cannot. This understanding transforms how we approach decision-making. Instead of trying to make choices that will be correct forever, we can make choices that are appropriate for current circumstances while remaining open to revision as circumstances change. Instead of seeking relationships that will never challenge us, we can appreciate relationships that grow and evolve with us. Instead of pursuing work that offers perfect security, we can engage with work that provides meaning and growth, knowing that both our needs and opportunities will shift over time. The practice of embracing impermanence also includes learning to let go gracefully when letting go is called for. This might mean ending conversations before they become stale, leaving parties while you are still enjoying them, concluding projects when they have served their purpose rather than extending them indefinitely. It might mean saying goodbye to people you love when circumstances require separation, knowing that the love itself remains even when the physical relationship changes form. Montaigne wrote extensively about death, not out of morbid fascination but out of recognition that awareness of mortality can enhance appreciation for life. When you truly understand that your time is limited, you become more discerning about how you spend it. When you accept that every experience is temporary, you pay more attention to the experience itself rather than trying to capture or extend it artificially. This awareness also changes how you relate to difficulties and setbacks. The job you hate will not last forever. The health challenges you face will either resolve or become manageable. The conflicts in your family will eventually reach some form of resolution. The political situations that seem intractable will shift as circumstances and people change. Nothing, neither suffering nor joy, maintains exactly the same form indefinitely. The courage of impermanence ultimately leads to what we might call mature hope, not the naive expectation that everything will work out exactly as you want, but the deeper confidence that whatever happens, you will continue to respond, adapt, and find meaning within changing circumstances. It is hope grounded not in the illusion of control, but in the reality of resilience, not in the fantasy of permanence, but in the fact of continuity within change. As we near the culmination of this exploration of Montaigne's liberating philosophy, we carry with us his gentle but radical invitation to embrace the flowing nature of existence, to find freedom not in making things permanent, but in learning to live beautifully within the constant flux of becoming. In a world that profits from your distraction, that rewards constant motion over momentary stillness, that has turned attention itself into a commodity to be harvested and sold, there is something profoundly revolutionary about the simple act of being fully where you are. Montaigne understood that presence is not a luxury for monks and mystics, but a practical skill for anyone who wants to live consciously rather than merely react to circumstances as they arise. You know the difference between presence and absence, even when your body remains in the same location. The way conversations deepen when you stop planning what to say next and start actually listening to what is being said. The way food tastes better when you eat slowly rather than rushing through meals while checking your phone. The way creativity flows more easily when you focus on one thing at a time rather than juggling multiple tasks and feeling productive while accomplishing little of real value. Montaigne's essays demonstrate a quality of attention that feels increasingly rare in our hyper-connected age. The ability to examine one idea thoroughly rather than skipping across the surface of many ideas. He could spend pages exploring a single observation about human nature, turning it over like a gem to examine all its facets, finding richness in depth rather than breadth. This was not because he lacked intellectual curiosity, but because he understood that real understanding comes from sustained attention rather than rapid accumulation of information. The practice of presence begins with recognizing how much of our mental energy is consumed by what we might call temporal displacement, living in the past through memory and regret, living in the future through anticipation and anxiety, but rarely inhabiting the present moment where actual life is happening. Notice how often your mind wanders to yesterday's conversation, tomorrow's responsibilities, next year's goals, while missing entirely what is available for experience right now. This displacement is not accidental but culturally conditioned. Consumer capitalism depends on keeping us focused on what we lack, rather than appreciating what we have. Social media platforms are designed to create a state of perpetual comparison with others' highlight reels, rather than engagement with our own daily experience. News media keeps us focused on distant events we cannot influence rather than local realities where our actions might make a difference. But Montaigne demonstrated that it is possible to live differently, to cultivate what we might call radical presentness, the discipline of returning attention to immediate experience whenever you notice it has wandered into regret or worry. This is not a rejection of memory or planning, both of which serve important functions, but a recognition that these mental activities are most useful when they arise from a foundation of present moment awareness. The ancient contemplative traditions developed numerous practices for training attention: meditation, prayer, mindful movement, contemplative reading. But Montaigne's approach was more informal and perhaps more accessible to people living ordinary lives with ordinary responsibilities. He practiced presence through careful observation of his own experience, through full engagement with whatever activity he was undertaking, through conversations where he listened not just to others' words, but to the feelings and intentions behind the words. This quality of attention transformed even mundane activities into opportunities for presence. Reading became not just information gathering, but communion with other minds across time. Writing became not just communication, but discovery of his own thoughts in the process of articulating them. Walking became not just transportation, but meditation in motion. Eating became not just fuel consumption, but sensory appreciation and social connection. The practice of presence also includes learning to be present with difficult emotions and challenging circumstances, rather than immediately trying to escape or fix them. Montaigne observed his own aging, illness, and mortality with the same curious attention he brought to more pleasant subjects. He did not pretend to enjoy suffering, but he refused to compound suffering by resisting it or denying it. This capacity to be present with difficulty is perhaps one of the most valuable skills we can develop. When you can stay present with anxiety rather than immediately seeking distraction, you often discover that the anxiety contains useful information about what needs attention in your life. When you can remain present with sadness rather than rushing to cheer yourself up, you create space for the natural healing that grief provides. When you can stay present with conflict rather than immediately trying to resolve it, you sometimes find that understanding emerges that would not have been possible through premature problem solving. The cultivation of presence also transforms how we relate to pleasure and success. Instead of constantly reaching for the next experience, achievement, or acquisition, presence allows us to fully receive what is already here. The cup of coffee becomes not just caffeine delivery, but a few minutes of warmth and flavor and pause. The conversation with a friend becomes not just information exchange, but genuine connection. The completion of a project becomes not just progress toward the next goal, but a moment of satisfaction and accomplishment worth acknowledging. Modern neuroscience has validated what contemplatives have always known: that training attention through presence practices literally changes the structure of the brain, strengthening areas associated with emotional regulation, empathy, and cognitive flexibility, while reducing activity in areas associated with anxiety, depression, and rumination. The benefits of presence are not just philosophical but physiological, but the deepest value of presence may be that it allows us to inhabit our own lives rather than merely observing them from a distance. How much of your life have you missed because you were mentally elsewhere when it was happening? How many conversations, meals, sunsets, and ordinary moments of beauty have passed unnoticed because your attention was focused on the past or future rather than the present? Montaigne's example suggests that presence is both a practice and a perspective, something we cultivate through regular return of attention to immediate experience, and something we choose in each moment when we remember that this moment, right now, is the only place where life is actually happening. It is where love is felt, where beauty is perceived, where meaning is discovered, where change occurs. The practice begins simply noticing when attention has wandered and gently returning it to what is happening now. This might be the sensation of breathing, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the sound of wind in trees, the taste of food, the expression on someone's face as they speak. It is not about achieving some special state of consciousness, but about inhabiting ordinary consciousness more fully. As we approach the conclusion of this exploration of Montaigne's path to freedom, we carry with us his understanding that presence is not an escape from life, but the fullest possible engagement with life. Not a withdrawal from the world, but the most complete way of inhabiting the world. Not a luxury for those with extra time, but a necessity for anyone who wants to live rather than merely exist. There is perhaps no teacher more honest than mortality, no philosopher more persuasive than the recognition that our time here is both precious and limited. Montaigne spent considerable energy contemplating death, not out of morbid fascination or existential despair, but out of the understanding that learning to die well is inseparable from learning to live well. In accepting the finite nature of existence, he discovered a freedom that the illusion of infinite time could never provide. You have felt the presence of this teacher in moments when mortality becomes suddenly real, the death of someone you love, a health scare that reminds you of your own vulnerability, or simply those quiet moments when you fully grasp that this life, your life, will someday end. These encounters with finitude can create anxiety, but they can also create clarity, a sudden understanding of what truly matters when stripped of everything that merely seems to matter. Montaigne's approach to mortality was characteristically practical and unsentimental. He did not pretend that death was anything other than loss, nor did he seek comfort in promises of afterlife reward. Instead, he found in the fact of death a powerful, clarifying force that helped him distinguish between essential and superficial concerns, between real problems and imaginary ones, between relationships worth cultivating and social obligations that drained energy without providing meaning. The ancient Stoics practiced what they called memento mori, remembering death not to become depressed but to become wise. When you truly understand that your time is limited, you become more discerning about how you spend it. When you accept that every relationship will eventually end, you invest more fully in the relationships that matter most. When you recognize that all your possessions will outlast you, you hold them more lightly and use them more generously. This awareness transforms the quality of daily experience in subtle but profound ways. Colors seem more vivid when you remember that you will see only a finite number of sunsets. Conversations become more precious when you recognize that every exchange might be among the last with this particular person. Even ordinary activities, cooking a meal, reading a book, walking in your neighborhood, take on additional depth when you approach them with the understanding that the number of such experiences is not infinite. But the art of dying well, as Montaigne understood it, is not primarily about the moment of death itself, but about the manner of living that makes death acceptable when it comes. It is about creating a life so full of meaning, connection, and authentic expression that when the time comes to let go, you can do so with what he called good grace, not eagerly perhaps, but without the bitter regret that comes from a life half-lived. This requires facing what psychologists call death anxiety, The fear not just of dying, but of having lived inadequately, of reaching the end without having discovered who you really are or contributed what you uniquely have to offer. Much of what we call midlife crisis is actually death anxiety, expressing itself as sudden urgency about unfulfilled dreams, unspoken truths, unexpressed love. Montaigne's response to this anxiety was neither denial nor despair, but what we might call conscious mortality, living with full awareness of life's temporary nature while refusing to be paralyzed by that awareness. He understood that death gives life its urgency and meaning in the same way that deadlines make projects possible and closing time makes last call precious. The practice of dying well begins long before any final illness or old age. It begins with the daily choice to live authentically, rather than performing roles that do not fit. It continues with the cultivation of relationships based on genuine affection rather than social convenience. It includes the pursuit of work that feels meaningful rather than merely profitable. The expression of creativity rather than merely competency. The exploration of questions that matter rather than answers that impress. This consciousness also changes how we relate to suffering and setbacks. When you understand that everything, including current difficulties, is temporary, you can endure hardship with greater patience and grace. When you accept that some problems will outlast you, you can work towards solutions without the crushing weight of needing to see everything resolved within your lifetime. When you recognize that your individual life is part of something larger and ongoing, you can contribute to causes that extend beyond your personal timeline. The fear of death often manifests as the fear of being forgotten, of having made no lasting impact, of disappearing without trace. But Montaigne discovered that this fear dissolves when you focus on the intrinsic value of living well, rather than the external rewards of being remembered. The sunset is not less beautiful because no one will remember that you watched it. The kindness you show to a stranger is not less valuable because it goes unrecorded. The truth you speak in private conversation is not less important because it reaches no broader audience. Moreover, legacy takes many forms, most of them invisible and unintentional. Every person you treat with genuine respect, every student you teach with passion, every example you set of authentic living, every moment of beauty you create or appreciate ripples outward in ways you may never know. You influence the world not primarily through grand gestures, but through the accumulated effect of countless small choices to be present, honest, kind, and fully yourself. The art of dying well also includes learning to let go gracefully of relationships that have run their course, of roles that no longer fit, of dreams that will not come true, of the fantasy that you can control how others remember you or what happens after you are gone. This letting go is not resignation but wisdom, not defeat but completion. It is the recognition that holding on too tightly to anything, even life itself, diminishes the quality of what we hold. Montaigne wrote that the goal is not to add more days to your life but more life to your days. This means being fully present for the experiences available to you rather than constantly reaching for experiences that might be available elsewhere. It means appreciating the ordinary miracles that surround you rather than waiting for extraordinary events that may never come. It means loving the people in your life rather than wishing they were different people or that different people were in your life. The ultimate freedom that comes from accepting mortality is the freedom from the exhausting attempt to make everything permanent. When you truly understand that nothing lasts forever, including yourself, you can engage fully with temporary things without the anxiety that comes from needing them to be eternal. You can love completely while accepting loss, create boldly while accepting impermanence, contribute generously while accepting that your impact will eventually fade. As we prepare for the final movement of this exploration, we carry with us Montaigne's gentle but radical invitation to befriend mortality as a teacher rather than an enemy, to find in the fact of death not a reason for despair, but a source of urgency, meaning, and ultimately peace. The art of dying well, he discovered, is simply the art of living fully embracing the temporary nature of existence as its most precious characteristic rather than its greatest limitation. After traveling through the complexities of human consciousness, the labyrinths of social expectation, and the contradictions that make us human, we arrive where all genuine wisdom eventually leads. Back to simplicity. Not the simplicity of ignorance, which never left home, but the simplicity of understanding, which has journeyed far and learned to distinguish between what matters and what merely demands attention. Montaigne's greatest gift may be showing us that the sophisticated life is not necessarily the complicated life, that wisdom often looks remarkably like common sense, and that the most profound truths are usually the most ordinary ones. You have felt this return to simplicity in moments when clarity suddenly emerges from confusion, when a complex problem reveals a simple solution, when you realize that what you thought required elaborate strategies actually needs only basic honesty, patience, or kindness. These moments point toward a way of being that Montaigne embodied throughout his essays. The capacity to remain simple without being simplistic, clear without being rigid, direct without being harsh. The journey we have taken together through Montaigne's philosophy of liberation, from the weight of others' expectations to the courage of authentic living, from the illusion of control to the wisdom of letting go, from the pursuit of perfection to the embrace of imperfection, leads inevitably to this recognition that most of what we thought was necessary is actually optional. Most of what we thought was complicated is actually straightforward, and most of what we thought required external validation is actually available through internal acceptance. This simplicity is not about reducing the richness of life, but about increasing its clarity. It is not about having fewer experiences, but about experiencing more fully. It is not about caring about fewer things, but about caring more effectively about the things that actually deserve your energy and attention. Montaigne demonstrated that you can be deeply engaged with life while remaining fundamentally untroubled by its inevitable ups and downs. The practice of simplicity begins with subtraction rather than addition. What can you remove from your life that adds complexity without corresponding value? What relationships drain energy without providing genuine connection? What activities consume time without producing satisfaction? What possessions require maintenance without serving real needs? What commitments were made by previous versions of yourself that no longer fit who you are becoming? This process of conscious subtraction is not about deprivation, but about clarity. Just as a sculptor reveals the statue by removing everything that is not essential to its form, living simply means removing everything that is not essential to your authentic expression. The goal is not minimalism for its own sake, but spaciousness, room to breathe, think, feel, and respond to life from your own center rather than from reaction to external pressures. Montaigne's version of simplicity included what we might call philosophical elegance, the ability to approach complex questions with simple principles rather than elaborate theories. His fundamental principles were few but powerful. Be honest with yourself. Treat others with basic human decency. Remain curious about life's mysteries. Accept what you cannot change while working thoughtfully on what you can influence. And remember that your time here is limited and therefore precious. These principles, simple as they appear, provide guidance for virtually any situation you might encounter. When facing difficult decisions, the question becomes, what would honesty require? When dealing with challenging people, the question becomes, how can I maintain basic decency while protecting my own well-being? When confronted with uncertainty, the question becomes, what can I learn from this situation that I could not learn from certainty? The return to simplicity also means recovering what we might call emotional directness, the ability to feel what you feel without immediately analyzing, justifying, or trying to change it. Montaigne observed his own emotions with the same interested attention he brought to everything else, neither suppressing them nor being overwhelmed by them. He understood that emotions are information rather than commands, weather rather than climate, temporary visitors rather than permanent residents. This emotional simplicity does not mean becoming emotionally shallow, but emotionally clear. Instead of the complicated story about why you should not feel angry, you simply acknowledge that you feel angry and consider what that anger might be trying to tell you. Instead of the elaborate justification for why your sadness is inappropriate, you allow yourself to feel sad while recognizing that sadness, like all emotions, will eventually pass. The simple life, as Montaigne lived it, is also surprisingly creative because it removes the obstacles that prevent natural creativity from emerging. When you are not constantly trying to impress others, you can explore ideas that genuinely interest you. When you are not exhausted by maintaining complicated social performances, you have energy available for authentic expression. When you are not worried about perfect outcomes, you can engage in the imperfect process of creating something that did not exist before. This creativity is not limited to traditionally artistic pursuits, but extends to the art of living itself, finding creative solutions to ordinary problems, expressing your personality through daily choices, and approaching relationships, work, and leisure with the kind of attention that transforms routine activities into opportunities for discovery and growth. The final simplicity that Montaigne points toward is perhaps the most profound. The recognition that you do not need to be anyone other than who you are. Not a better version of yourself, not a more successful version, not a version that would impress your critics or satisfy your parents or meet society's expectations, but simply the person you actually are, with all your contradictions, limitations, and unique contributions to the grand experiment of human consciousness. This is not an excuse for complacency or self-indulgence, but an invitation to authentic engagement. When you stop trying to be someone else, you can begin the much more interesting work of becoming more fully yourself. When you accept your natural form, you can focus on expressing it more skillfully rather than distorting it to fit forms that were never meant for you. The path we have walked together through Montaigne's wisdom leads to this simple but revolutionary conclusion, that the life you already have, lived with awareness and acceptance, is enough. Not perfect, not complete, not impressive by external standards, but enough to provide meaning, connection, growth, and satisfaction. Enough to justify the brief miracle of your existence. Enough to allow you to contribute something valuable to the ongoing conversation of human experience. This enoughness is not resignation but recognition, seeing clearly what is actually available rather than being distracted by fantasies of what might be available elsewhere. It is the freedom that comes from wanting what you have while working skillfully with what you have been given. It is the peace that emerges when you stop fighting reality and start dancing with it. As we conclude this exploration of liberation through letting go, we carry with us Montaigne's gentle but radical invitation to return home to ourselves, not as a retreat from the world, but as the foundation for genuine engagement with the world, not as an end but as a beginning, not as a final answer but as a way of living more lightly and lovingly within the beautiful, temporary, endlessly fascinating gift of being human. The moment you stop caring about the wrong things, the right things find their way to you. The moment you stop performing for an audience that was never really watching, you can begin the authentic performance of your own unique existence. The moment you stop trying to control what cannot be controlled, you discover what can be influenced. And in that discovery lies not the end of caring, but the beginning of caring wisely. Not the end of effort, but the beginning of effective effort. Not the end of your story, but the first page of the story you were always meant to write.